today, we can just connect. If you guys want to speak to me or Sille directly, she'll drop her link at the end of it, and you could just reach out to her. So take it over, Sille.
Thank you, Theo, and good morning, everyone. It's really nice to see also such a diverse group already from Jamaica. That's fantastic. I hope you all got a chance to grab a cup of coffee, and it's just cold, but a very beautiful morning here in Copenhagen, I can say that. But let's get into it. So, approximately 4% of all pregnant women develop gestational diabetes during their pregnancy. For most people, though, the diabetes will disappear after giving birth. But around 50% of those women will develop type 2 diabetes within the next 10 years, and the risk is even higher if you get pregnant again. 3 years ago, I was myself diagnosed with gestational diabetes, and receiving that message was difficult. So when I learned that the design consultancy that I work in got the opportunity to design a digital therapeutic product for a global pharma company within the diabetes care sector, I knew that I wanted to be part of that project because I had experience of what it felt like to be in that position and receive that message. And I experienced, all of that uncertainty in my own body. I know it can't, of course, be completely compared to getting a type 1 or type 2 diagnosis because it is disappearing for a while. Yes. So the talk that I will do today, I'll cover some learnings from that particular project. So I'll go into a bit more, what is it actually, this thing, digital therapeutic? I will look into what is the problem space from a design perspective. And then I'm going to share with you 5 key takeaways that you can hopefully also use in your future work. So a bit of background. My name is Sille. I'm based in Copenhagen, and I have a background in communication and digital design. And I have now 7+ years of experience with UX design and design strategy. For the past 4 years, I've worked in ManyOne, which is a global design strategy consultancy. And this is where I got the opportunity not only to work with a bunch of talented people, but also to work on several projects within the healthcare sector. And my fascination with this field is a true head over heels love story, actually. I am just really blessed and intrigued of being, or by the potential of being part of changing people's life for the better. But as you know, with great power also comes great responsibility. And in digital therapeutics, we are dealing with people's lives, which is a bit scary, to be honest. Yes. So reflecting on the design project we have done, I think there are some interesting things to learn to evolve as UX practitioners in this field, also for the pharma side, in this rather new field that is digital therapeutics. Because good UX definitely makes a difference for the products, for people, and for businesses as well. So one thing that I learned is that it's always a good idea to have a definition, a slide with a definition in talks like this. So here we go. What is digital therapeutic? Well, it is digital therapeutics deliver evidence-based therapeutic interventions that are driven by high-quality software programs to either prevent, manage, or treat a medical disorder or disease. So if we break it down a bit, it's evidence-based. It must drive positive patient outcomes in order to be classified as a digital therapeutic. And it is subject to the same standards in terms of clinical validation and compliance with national regulatory agencies and so on as traditional medicine is. It goes probably without saying that it must be safe to use, which also, of course, places great demands on the code itself. And then it's divided into these 3 classes: class 1 to prevent, class 2 to manage, and class 3 to treat a disorder or disease. So there are currently more than 20 digital therapeutics that are approved by the FDA as we speak. Probably some more that I don't know of. But the industry for sure is developing at a very fast speed. So just to give you an example of a class 2, which is the managed category, this is Blue Star. It's a mobile app for individuals that is living with type 1 or type 2 diabetes. And it connects multiple health devices and data sources. And what it essentially does is that it provides tailored digital coaching and insights about how to manage diabetes for that person using the solution. Moving into the class 3 category, which is the one that I will focus on today, that is software that treats your disorder or disease. And that's why it will, as it is right now at least, always be prescription only. So we also know this class as prescription digital therapeutics. There are some different definitions, but I think this has gained the most momentum. And PDTs is held to the highest standards in terms of clinical results, evidence, and regulatory oversight. And the interesting thing here is that it can be either software alone, or it can be in combination with traditional drugs. It's actually only 5 years ago that the FDA approved the first prescription digital therapeutic. It was a payer therapeutic. I think it was Reset, which was a therapeutic software that treats, I think, something with getting over drug abuse, substance abuse. But if we look at the landscape, it was really the tech and health startups like Payer Therapeutics and other that kickstarted the venture into digital prescription digital therapeutics, but of course along with a lot of other players. And many of these PDTs have been historically software or device solutions only, and it is really pushing in the innovation space in the healthcare sector. And we are going to see a lot of growth and innovation in this field for sure. But I also feel like that's a totally different or separate talk about all the incredible opportunities that lie ahead in that space. But what we also see is that the established big pharma companies are also gearing up and partnering with tech and health design competencies to develop their own offerings within this field. And the ambition here is, of course, to drive better treatment outcomes for their patients in combination with their current drugs. But this is a new playing field for pharma companies. It's a platform to engage with their users in new ways that they haven't done before. And that also means, of course, that it's also a positioning parameter for them in order to gain competitive edge. But going back to the project that my team and I worked on, as I mentioned, it was for a pharma company. So I'm going to speak about a PDT that is used in combination with a traditional drug. Unfortunately, as it is in this field, I'm not able to go into too much details about the actual product and the client that we work for. But what I can tell you is that it's an app that assists patients in the initiation phase of insulin treatment. And in this phase, what people need to do is that they need to adjust the dose gradually to match the individual needs, with the goal, of course, to lower or to get their blood sugar levels down into that target range. And today, that adjustment phase is a very handheld and can be a long process with patient and doctor, where the patient essentially goes to the doctor with a logbook or with some numbers, and the doctor then assesses that and comes with some kind of guidance until next time they'll meet again. But with this product we are developing, the patients now do that themselves in the comfort of their own home and within a shorter time frame. But the thing here for the patients is getting too much insulin can be at least a very unpleasant experience, but ultimately it can also be fatal. So that requires a lot of trust for patients in this product in order for them to use it. To put this a bit more into perspective in terms of potential outcomes, I think it's also important to keep in mind that PDTs in this scenario are of course not the answer to everything, because since they are to be prescribed by a doctor, it's only the people who are already diagnosed that will benefit. And this leads me to talk about a very well-known image in the type 2 diabetes care that is called the rule of halves. Some of you probably heard of it before, but let me just quickly go through it. So the thing is that out of all the people estimated to live with diabetes, only 50% of them are diagnosed. And only 50% of those who are diagnosed are receiving care. But of those 50%, only 50% of those are reaching their treatment targets. So what we know that you can get out of the medication if you take it right. And 50% of those also reach their treatment, reach their achieved desired outcomes for the treatment, which is essentially to see a decrease of incidence in comorbidities. But the potential here is, in our case at least, is to minimize the gap between treatment outcomes that we see in clinical trials and the treatment outcomes that we see in the real world, so that more people will benefit, get the most out of that treatment. But then why is it that people don't reach their treatment goals? That's the interesting question, I guess. And the answer can be boiled down into the adherence problem, as it's called in pharma language. And the adherence problem speaks basically to the fact that people do not always exactly know what they're supposed to do when it comes to their medical regimens. And that means that they don't get the optimal effect out of the treatment. But it's not because people are stupid or very forgetful or think they know better. It's really just because they are human. My sister, for instance, she has asthma. She holds a PhD in molecular biomedicine. So in other words, I perceive her as a rather brainy person. But when it comes to her asthma, she only uses her inhaler when she starts to feel the symptoms of her asthma. But she knows that in order to get the best effect out of it, she must take it every day. Also on days with no symptoms. But she doesn't. And why? It's just because she's human. Of course, we can't compare asthma with diabetes directly, but there are though some similarities here. And one of them is that there are, in diabetes type 2 treatment, no immediate risk of not taking your medication. For type 2, the consequences are more long-term. So it can be a bit easier to skip some of the things that you have to do. But it's not just my sister. This is basically a fact that we see in behavioral sciences. People don't always do what they say they do or what they are supposed to do. And this is also why I think like this adherence term is just really bad when you look at it from a human perspective, because no human will ever be 100% adherent. It's an ideal. Reality is different. And even with the best intentions and the most knowledge, there is just also the other side of the coin. People that are suffering from autoimmune diseases such as diabetes, for those, chances are that they will eventually or are already dealing with other and maybe more acute illnesses. Or life just happens. Something gets in the way. And we, of course, also have the economic aspect. For some people, they simply doesn't have the means to pay for their treatment. And of course, that's also a factor here. But essentially then, what we are doing is that we are designing for behavior change. We want people to do something that they're currently not doing by themselves. And in comparison with other habit-changing apps on the market, we do this in an arena where people are actually risking their lives. Which means then that the problem that we must solve for is how can we make it easy for patients to do what they're supposed to do in a manner where they feel safe and confident, because otherwise they won't do it. Yes, so this leads me to how do we then go about designing solutions that enhances the chances of people using it just enough? And it really starts by acknowledging the fact that no user will ever be perfect, or no patient. And our design should reflect that. So I'm going to share with you now 5 key takeaways. All of them will revolve around the same theme, which is simplicity. But let's start with number 1. No one living with a chronic disease wants to engage more than necessary with that disease. For diabetes, the best case scenario of treatment is to mitigate a negative future, because there is no cure and it's not a very motivating prospect for them. Of course not. So the true value here for patients lie where they, with the minimum effort, can gain the maximum effect out of the treatment. And we really have to take that serious. We must, in every aspect of the design, think, how can we minimize interactions, time spent, and other disturbing factors that we might come up with, or someone else might come up with, without, of course, compromising the safety of the product. And how can we do that? Well, we can make interfaces that are unambiguous and very easy to scan, and be just very mindful of the use of notifications or other needless forms of communication that the patient have not asked for themselves. Number 2, what we also want to do is that we want to minimize the cognitive load as much as possible, not because people are stupid, but because this is a very complex time for them. And it really comes down to a communication problem, at least from where I see it. So historically, pharma companies have spent so much time on developing a language that is purposely designed to be inaccessible to patients. And here you just see a random quote about some instructions about an injection. But I mean, I'm already lost at the very first word, the subcutaneous. Actually, I still don't know what it means, and I Googled it twice. Yes, so if we want the user experience then to be simple, our role as designers is how to support that change in language for the pharma companies. And this is not an easy task. This is something that has been inherited over many, many years. So what we need to do then is that we have to go out and talk to patients. We have to identify what are the words they are using, what or how do they see their disease. And for instance, in our research, we saw that nobody used the word glucose. All of them used sugar. And then we just used sugar instead of using the clinical correct term in the app. We've also found that it can be very beneficial for, I mean, this is an app, so we have a little screen, but utilize maybe contextual help options like the little question mark on the top of the screen, or a little line with a question where it prompts the user to dive into it if they feel the need to learn more or get more details, but it would not mess with the overall ambition to make everything easy and simple to scan, basically, for the patient. Third, this is not only true for these kind of apps, but the first interaction with a product is undoubtedly very, very important. And what we have experienced, at least, is that there is a lot that pharma companies would like the patient to know up front. I think this tendency comes down to the fact that they want to be able to document in user testing that the user know everything about the product and how it's supposed to be used right after the initial setup for safety reasons. They can report upwards that this is a safe product because people know what to do. But the problem here, when we front load a lot of information to users, is that they will probably forget, if we're lucky, 90% of the information. So we should really not underestimate complexity in this situation. People are learning a lot of different things, how to inject themselves, new dose sizes, treatment plans, and all of this while going through emotional distress. And there might also be other things in their lives that's happening. So what we did instead was that we made sure to make the time from setting up the account until they were actually able to enter the app as short as possible. And then we added a couple of small guides on the front page along the way that introduces the patients to the most important features and concepts. But they were in control of when they were ready to get that information. And we also designed for that to come when they needed it. So the idea about the user must know everything before they start using an app to be able to use it, I believe, is false. We must see it more as a process that unfolds over time. And that's okay. Instead of we are risking that they just get overwhelmed and won't use the product at all. So the goal here is really to enhance the user's experience of confidence. We want them to say, ooh, this is simple, I can do this. Because in our studies, we found that this sense of confidence was actually the most influential parameter to drive trust in the product. And remember, trust was an essential part of people using this app in the first place. But in order to do this and to know what to communicate to the patients and when, we must understand exactly what the patients needs to know and when they'll need to know it. Where in the journey do they have questions or things that they would like to know, or things that we would like them to know? So we did a mapping of all the key learning moments throughout the user journey and combined that with other very important moments in the journey. And then from those points, we ideated on how can we best make use of that moment. And here you can think in both content, in formats, but also in different channels. Maybe maybe an email is sometimes a better format. In some cases. So I can give you another example. In our project, we knew from research that people are hesitant on taking a higher dose than they're used to because it might be dangerous. It might also be good for their treatment. But in this case, we wanted to design something that could ease that uncertainty exactly at the moment where it happened. But again, in order to do so, it's really important to understand what is truly going through the user's mind at this point. So you have to talk to them. You have to be curious about what are the real barriers here. And I found that tactics from behavioral design here are very, very useful. If the patients are feeling shame of taking a higher dose, then maybe social proof could be interesting to look at. It could be something like, did you know that 85% of people using this insulin actually end up at a higher dose than this? But if the barrier is more fear-driven, for instance, of fear of getting a hypoglycemic event, then that tactic wouldn't work. Then you might need to emphasize the clinical validation of this product. It's well tested, it's approved, and your personal doctor also approved this app for you. And last, but probably also, I think the most important one, we need to remember to design for when things go wrong. We are so good at designers to design for the sunshine cases, but this is when things go wrong, this is where we actually can do a difference, because this is where people typically drop out. And we just really have to take even the small barriers very serious. It's very easy to say to people, compared to the regimen that we have here for you, you didn't do this and this, you have to do that. But we must also remember that most people actually want to do what they're supposed to do. So there is a reason probably why they didn't. So how can we then show empathy in these scenarios? How can we tell them that it's probably not the end of the world, try to minimize guilt, and make then actions to do very clear? We need to show them a way back on track again. And there might be multiple ways. But here there is really a catch-22, because due to the very strict regulatory oversight and all the legal complexity, risk assessment is a huge part of the process of developing these products. And mitigating all of these risks means, unfortunately for the user, that they will be prompted with a lot of information. And in the midst of that, they might miss something that is actually important for them. So as designers, we can try to challenge, when is it that something is actually wrong? When do we need to act on it? But you can also investigate if there's some kind of flexibility that's built into the drug in this case. For instance, is there a plan A, B, and C? For birth control pills, I know that if you miss one, depending on when you missed it and where you are in the cycle, there are some different options that you must figure out by this rather complex diagram that's included in the package. But here in digital therapeutics, we can remove that complexity from the patient, and we can show only the option matching their current scenario. So again, it's very important to make it clear and actionable for them. I hope all of this sounds somewhat familiar to you, because the good news here is that I probably haven't mentioned anything that you didn't knew or incorporated in some way in your practice. It's not a new skill set that is required of us. It's just basically more of what we already do as designers. But I must also say that it's a lot easier said than done. Especially all the regulatory complexity makes designing these kind of solutions a whole new ball game. It's definitely a space where it's really, really difficult to be an ideal designer. You have to try, while you also keep it real. So with that said, thank you very much for listening. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or write me an email. I would love to continue the conversation with you. And just to let you know as well, we have offices around the world. So if you want to connect with a local office, feel free to do that as well. And yeah, then questions, if there are any.
Thank you, sir. That was fantastic. We do have some questions. We got quite a bit of input here. So the first question comes from Sarah, and Sarah's question is, I hope I get this right. Forgive the church bells ringing in the back. Regarding using simple words, do you have a place where you merge the different meanings? So sugar, glucose, other words it's named with. In the example, it is probably quite simple, but there are certainly words that lead to confusion when used incorrectly. How do you deal with it?
Very good question. I think the diplomatic question here is that, of course, you have to look at it in the bigger picture, in the bigger context. So, I mean, I don't really think I have a good answer for that other than to go into it, look at the options, look at the pros and cons for not using it. What we did, I can say, is that whenever we used it, remember we use a lot of these contextual help options. So in those, we also made sure to translate into the clinical correct terms as well in a I don't know what that's called actually. Yes, you know what I mean, I hope. But of course, you should be very mindful of that when you design, of course.
Okay, perfect. Our next question comes from Rafika. And her question is, how are patients educated on managing their insulin to be able to understand and achieve their desired outcomes?
Can you say it again? It was a bit...
Sorry. How are patients educated on managing their insulin to be able to understand and achieve their desired outcomes?
I'm sorry, I really have difficulties. Can I maybe find where's the look at the question now? Who's it from?
It's the top question. It's from Rafika.
I can't see. So what I think I hear is that how do patients manage?
Yeah, just educating and managing patients of the insulin.
I think I get it.
Pardon?
So this is actually one of the points that I pointed towards, like with the bite-sized onboarding, because with this self-managing diabetes, especially in the initiation phase, there are a lot of complex models that you have to understand. We found that it was very difficult for patients to understand that that your dose must go up in order to get better, and that when you reach your target, most patients anticipated that the dose will then be lower than where they started out, and there is a conflict of patients' mental models around these titration plans. And we found that people were not able to grasp that in the beginning. So biting that information, chopping it up and providing it bit by bit as they went along has proven to, in our studies at least, has shown that people got a better understanding of how that diagram between a higher dose and a lower blood sugar is correlated. So yeah, I hope that's an answer. Okay, otherwise, please write again.
Another question is, how effective is notifications when dealing with patients? And I'm thinking that's coming from self-managing.
They can be effective, but they are not the answer to everything. So there are many reasons for that. If we saw that a lot of the patients that we talked to thought that the reminders was a very nice add-on, or provided a lot of value for them. So in that sense, it's really, really important. But you can't solely rely on reminders when you're doing this, because people can turn off their reminders on the phone and then they don't get it. or something else happens, or they just get blind because they see it so often. So it's important, but you can't solely rely on reminders. You have to think something else in. And for instance, designing for when things go wrong, one of the things that we also look into is that if we start to see that people are not doing what we think they should do, then we started to prompt them with information in different channels. So not in the app, but in emails, for instance, because that format is for some actually a bit more serious, or it also there's also more space because some patients will also then have the opportunity to look at these messages on a larger screen, for instance, so they can get a bit more complex background into what is it that we think is the important message for you right now, where you are.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you for that. So I have it's not really a question, but I think it's the definition of the word you were looking for, which was subcutaneous. And Dr. Heinz just said it's under the skin, but not as deep as muscle. Yes, it took me a while.
Perfect. Lovely. I'm so happy to know that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always great having a doctor in the house. So this is another question. This is the final question.
Love it.
Final question from Ekaterina. Usually before use the app, user need to fill a long questionnaire. Can you give some tips on how to ease the cognitive load to find this questionnaire and also, to fill this questionnaire, and also how to make this process less boring?
Yes, I think depending on the solutions that you're doing, we also looked into partner integrations with the HCP. So could some of these questions be when they are prescribing the solution, could some of the questions already be filled in by the doctor in that conversation, so we minimize the number of maybe also more medical records for the patient. And yes, I think there are more engaging ways to discover this, but I think the most to design this. But I think the most important thing is probably to see if it's okay to get patients that first sense of success by just getting into the app. It seems silly, but it's really, really important to break success down in a lot of small bites. So also another point that I didn't mention here is we also worked with how can we show people in the beginning of the use of the product, success. So the first time they did the minimum task that we could break it down to correctly, we said, yes, very well. This is exactly what you need to do. You're doing great. And we just had a little clapping animation, and it seems silly, but it really drives. It really meant something for the patients, and they started to trust themselves. Yes. So if you are in any way if you can anyway put these kind of questionnaires later in the process or just right after, so maybe they get a sense of the app, but they have to go through some steps before. Do that instead of putting it all on the first in the first success bulk, which is to actually get into the app, to sign in and create an account. I don't think you have to be very innovative when it comes to new ways to do this. It's also a factor of just doing what works and what we know works when we're designing this, because it's not for patients. This is not it's not just for fun. There's also this kind of you need to meet this balance of seriousness while making it simple to use.
Okay, Sille, thank you for that.
But it's a good question, and just contact me. I can elaborate a bit more on that.
Yeah, I see Klaus just commented on that as well. Klaus is also from Many One, and he said, break it down. Only ask for the most important information for making the use of the app possible. Typically, legal and marketing ask for a lot of non-important information. UX designers need to push back. That's a very good comment there, so thanks for that.
Thanks for that.
So, sorry, this is going to be the last question now, guys. We need to move on to our next session. So this is from Fabrizio. Concerning the use of onboarding, during our test concerning complex app domains, the onboarding procedure was completely useless. Users searched for keywords to complete their task, preferring self-discovery to user guidance. Is it possible that this is a trend that users from old systems expect certain actions in new ones as well?
That's a big question. I don't think I can answer that in short. So, but again, I would love to have some time to look at it. And to be honest, my mind couldn't get all of that information in the same time. But the person who asked that question, write it to me in text, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, Fabrizio, what I can do is I'll connect you with Sille as well. So on that question, maybe you guys can discuss.
I would love to answer it a bit better than, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Sille. That was a fantastic session. Can we just give her a round of applause in the comment section there, please?
Thank you, and have a lovely day, everyone.